This is Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana University basketball discussion, hosted by Inside the Hall founder and editor, Alex Bozich. Since 2007, Inside the Hall has been trusted by IU fans across the globe to be the one-stop shop for IU basketball news, commentary, and analysis. Join us over at InsideTheHall.com. That's InsideTheHall.com.
Welcome back, everybody, to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink. Never a dull moment right now with IU basketball. A lot of news breaking in terms of the transfer portal this week. I'm sure there's going to be more news as we move throughout the week. But to help us break it all down and to do a little a fun exercise, I want to talk about some of the pros and cons of some of the names that have been discussed for the IU job. Ryan Phillips, senior writer for The Big Lead and a co-host of Assembly Call, is back with us. How you doing, Ryan?
Great. Second time on the show. I'm excited. It took a long time for the first time, and then, in a couple months, I've gotten 2 appearances. So
the joke here is that it took a pandemic for you to come on the first time, and now it took a coaching change. So maybe after a coaching hire is made, you can come back. So
I'm always available to you, Alex, and I've always been available for like the 8 years you've been doing this. So. But yeah, it's catastrophic events. I come on.
So Ryan, I want to get your quick reaction. We had some news yesterday that Armaan Franklin has entered the transfer portal, and today Parker Stewart has entered the transfer portal. And I think some people are getting a little antsy in terms of no coach being hired, and now you're starting to see some guys move into the portal. I'm more of the mindset of this isn't necessarily a huge deal because, first of all, these players have the right to do whatever they want given the uncertainty of the situation. And second of all, just because they go into the portal doesn't necessarily mean they're leaving Indiana. What do you say about these two guys going into the portal?
Yeah, I think it's smart for both of them to do it, to explore their options. As for Armaan, I think just having talked to people sort of in his orbit, I think his preference is to stay at Indiana. But you've got to get the process started of talking to other coaches and things. If the coach that comes in does not have you in his plans, you don't fit the system, whatever. I think this is the smart thing to do. Quite frankly, I wouldn't be shocked to see a lot of guys across the country who intend to return going into the portal because there's no harm in doing it. You can always come back. And so I think this is what they should be doing, especially with a vacancy in the coaching position. It's going to be about contacting the other schools, getting feedback, seeing where you could possibly go. Then when the new coach comes in, see what that guy can offer you and see what, how you fit into the future of the program. And it's also worth noting for Indiana fans who are upset and say like, oh, we can't afford to lose Armaan or whatever. I mean, I would agree for next year, it would really be a huge blow to lose Armaan Franklin. But when you're hiring a coach, hopefully for the next 20 years. One player isn't going to make or break. If you have a bad season to start, it's understandable. Guys leave, whatever, you have a transition. But if Armaan Franklin leaves and you land a great coach who's going to turn the program around, you'll take that trade-off in the long run. The issue would be if you lose Armaan Franklin, you get a guy who's not that great, and you struggle for a bunch of years because you don't have a scoring guard who could lead you, and then we're back in the same position we were in a couple of years. But a good coach will transcend that, so I think that really on both sides, everybody should just calm down. It's going to happen. And the other thing, if people are antsy about the coach, it's been a week. These things usually take 3 weeks to a month. I mean, when it happened, I didn't expect a coach to be named until either at or after the Final Four. And so people who after, 4 days over the weekend were just like, oh God, what are we doing? And it's, guys, you gotta calm down. They got to interview people. They got to explore options. They got to do background checks. All of that stuff has to be done. And so this takes time. And I know when you're in the situation, it feels like an eternity, but it really hasn't been that long in, the grand scheme of things.
I went back in the archives and looked at the Archie Miller hire, and it was 9 days exactly. And that circumstance was different in that, Tom Crean had been the coach for 9 years, and I think there was, probably even more background work done in that instance. There was an idea that a change could be made. With Archie Miller, I don't think, I don't know if Scott Dolson would ever talk about this, but I don't think he entered conference play or even the late part of the season with the idea I'm going to have to get rid of Archie Miller. I think more or less it was how Indiana played down the stretch that kind of necessitated that he do so. So, you can say whatever you want about him kind of having a list in the back of his mind. The fact that he is actually now having to do the search, I don't think is something that was planned or expected. So the fact that we're 9 days in, I agree. It feels like a long time, right? Because the news cycle and Twitter, everything.
There's news every day.
Exactly. So, but in the grand scheme of things, if it takes them a couple weeks to get this hire, and I agree with you, if you get the right coach, that coach is going to be able to keep most guys in the fold. Now, if there's an instance that a guy says, Archie Miller was my guy, I'm not going to play for somebody else, then that's fine. It's their right to go somewhere else. But I wouldn't.
It didn't matter who you hired or how long it took. Yeah,
right. And I won't be surprised if other guys go in the transfer portal. I'm not trying to sound the alarms, but I mean think of it from the player perspective. If you're a parent or if you're somebody advising a player, and the school that you're at currently doesn't have a coach, you don't know what the future holds. It makes sense to kind of at least get your name out there and build these relationships so that in case it doesn't work out, you have somewhere else to go. And with Armand Franklin, there's going to be no shortage of suitors. Parker Stewart is definitely understandable because he came to IU for Kenya Hunter primarily. Yeah. He had the relationship with his dad, and he never played in Indiana. He's only been here a few months, and so it makes sense for him to look at his options. So that's kind of where I stand on it. What I wanted to do, Ryan, and I want to preface all of this by saying, I've said this, and I don't know if you agree with me, you can agree with me or you can disagree, but that in terms of this search right now, the people who know what's going on are not saying much, and if anything, and the people who don't know, in some cases, are saying too much. So that's kind of how this works. I've been asked on our forum, various places, to give my opinion on what's going to happen. The truth is, I have no clue what's going to happen. I can make educated guesses, but I think by design, Scott Dolson is handling this in a way to where little information is going to get out. So I want to preface this whole conversation with that. This is not meant to be a list of candidates that I think are being considered for the job. We
can get them off the fax machine, Scott Dolson's fax machine.
Exactly. I just wanted to get your take on some guys and maybe bounce, some ideas off you, pros and cons of some of the names being discussed. Who knows? We may not even have the guy who's going to get the job in this discussion. Let's start with Chris Beard because a lot has been made of him, and obviously he has been a very successful coach at a program that hasn't had a ton of success historically. There's the ties to Bob Knight. From your perspective, if Indiana hires Chris Beard, what are the one or two things that kind of stand out to you as being the main positives of that hire?
Well, I think the big sea change from Archie is energy. He's just a very energetic guy who gets people on his side. He gets people. So I feel like Archie was the guy who was very quiet and was like, I'm going to convince people by winning and by the way we play. It's not going to be in the media. I'm not going to be out there cheerleading for the program. I'll say what I need to say when I need to say it, but I'm not going to be a forward face for a lot of these things. And I think Chris Beard is the opposite. Chris Beard wants people to be in love with his program. And I think that would be a huge change for Indiana. And it's not the manic energy you had under Tom Crean. It feels very focused and I don't know. It just feels very positive in some way. I also think the other thing is just he seems to have a plan for everything. I really think he's incredibly thorough, and it took him a long time to get to this level. And I think that when guys do that, they think about it a lot. They're very introspective about what they need to do when they get there. And it feels like he's done that at Texas Tech. It feels like every year they're a very well-prepared team. Now this year, the record doesn't jump off the page, but they had a ton of close games, a ton of close losses. And you're also dealing with, transfers, and they lost a lot. And transfers coming in, I should say, and they lost a lot. And it felt like this team was battling against itself because he didn't have a chance to really build a team. Because guys came in, you had the pandemic, you didn't have a chance to work together, and then you're just kind of out there in the middle of the Big 12, which was phenomenal this year. And so, but I just feel like he's a very well-prepared coach, and you talk to people and they say that. And he's also a guy who has that kind of energy that I think draws people to the program. He's not Bruce Pearl. He's not jumping on tables, screaming in a cafeteria, but he will get people excited about the program again. I think that he's very interesting for that reason and how it fits at Indiana.
Well, I think the most interesting thing you said about him is it wasn't a great year, but he was still a 6 seed and in the mix. He got to the second round, exactly at Texas Tech. Remember that, people.
Yeah.
He's not at...
He's recruiting to Lubbock. Yeah.
Exactly. I've never been to Lubbock, but I've not heard that it's a destination place for people to flock to. The other thing I'll say about him is not only is he charismatic and energetic, he seems to have a sense of humor. The fireside chat thing is something that I think fans connect with and they enjoy watching those. I just get the sense that he doesn't take himself too seriously. And I think that is a good thing, because coming from Tom Crean, who was at many times paranoid about everything that was being said and written about him, and Archie Miller, who really could have cared less what was being said or written about him, I think it's, I think that type of personality could be a fit. In terms of cons of a hire of Chris Beard, I mean, this is one of the guys I look at on the list, and I can't really think of anything or point to anything and say there's something that makes him an unattractive candidate, because as we've talked about, he's gone to a place that's historically not a very good program, and he's built it into a national power. To go to a national championship game at Texas Tech is just an outstanding accomplishment.
Yeah.
Hey, it's Jared. I'm going to hop in here real quick and talk for a minute about homefieldapparel.com, our friends at homefieldapparel.com, where they have the best selection of vintage IU gear that you will find anywhere. And it's not just for IU. They have over 90, I don't know, it might be over 100 by now, different colleges and universities where they basically go back in time, pick out these old brand marks and logos that haven't been used in a long time, pull them back, and put them on the most comfortable t-shirts and crew necks and hoodies that you will find anywhere. And they sell them all for a good price. And they're comfortable. And they hold up to being being put in the washing machine. It's high quality material. It's incredible logos. And look, it's a brand that you can support. They're Hoosiers. The guys behind Home Field Apparel went to IU. They cheer for IU. If you follow them on Twitter, you know that they've turned other fans of other schools into IU fans because of their presence there. So it's a great brand worth supporting. And the best part is when you support Home Field Apparel, you get awesome gear out of it, whether it's football designs, basketball designs. They've got something for everybody at homefieldapparel.com, especially for the IU fans in your life or for you. So go to homefieldapparel.com, use the promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, at checkout, and you will get 20% off your entire order. That's promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, at homefieldapparel.com. Now back to the show.
Let's work our way down. And like I said, this is not a list in any order. This is just some of the guys that we have written about, we've talked about.
Names who've been mentioned, kind of thing.
Okay, so number 2, and I'm sure you're going to have some takes on this because I know that there's been some back and forth with you and your co-host and a host of this show, Jared Morris. Mike Woodson is obviously a name that's been talked about. I understand it from the standpoint of he's an Indiana alum. He's coached in the NBA. He's well respected by a lot of people in the NBA. From your perspective, the pros of Mike Woodson as Indiana coach are what?
Well, the pros is relationships. He's known as a great guy. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people about this since his name came up. And, I know about Mike Woodson, but I, know a whole lot about him as far as like his interpersonal relationships and things like that over the last couple weeks. I've talked to some people in the NBA who think that he creates relationships with players. He's really personable. I've known a lot of people over the years who've told me he's just a great guy. And so he's also an offensive guy. He's got a really good offensive mind. I mean, that's what he does with the Knicks. He's basically leading their offense from the bench as an assistant now. He's been an assistant under some great coaches. He's got some experience, a lot of experience in the NBA, and he's been around a long time. I mean, he's a guy who's pretty much been constantly at least an assistant coach since 1996. So he certainly has experience. He knows how to run a professional offense, and he's a lot of people rave about his ability to create relationships with people, and a lot of people really like him. I mean, those are the pros that I've got on him. And I will say this: I think that, again, from everything I've heard, Mike Woodson's a great guy. And so when I talk about the cons, I don't want people to think I don't like him or think he's a terrible person or anything. But I think that you would agree there's some cons there.
So, in your mind, what's the biggest con to you that he's never been a college coach? Is it he's never recruited? Is it a combination of those two, or is it just because you don't feel like it's a I guess sexy hire, quote unquote?
Well, no, I mean, I don't care if it's not a sexy hire if it makes sense, but he's never coached in college, even as an assistant at any level. And he's never, he's also going to be 63 this week. Are we expecting Mike Woodson to really grind on the recruiting trail and hit the road and all that at his age? I mean, legitimately, it doesn't make sense, so how are you going to, get used to coaching a different type of player? And it can work. I'm not saying it couldn't work, but I just think there's a lot of question marks. It's like, now you're going to be coaching 18-year-olds instead of grown men. You're going to be having to recruit. And let's be real. I mean, the guys he's going to be recruiting against are dedicated to recruiting. And then you're going to have to sort of play within the constraints of the NCAA, having never done it before. I mean, there's a lot of factors to building a program in college that, we don't see on the court. It's all off the court of building that. And quite frankly, all of that stuff is almost as important as your ability to coach, as your ability to build a program. And recruiting is involved with that. But I also think, you look at his professional record, and he was good in certain years, but overall he had a below 500 winning percentage. And I've heard from a lot of Indiana fans this week, just like, oh no, he was a great coach. He was awesome. And he's so well respected and all this. It's like, well, then why hasn't he been an NBA head coach since 2014? When the Knicks fired him. It's, if he's so great, and I'm not saying he isn't, maybe he is, but the people who run NBA franchises are pretty smart, and they haven't hired him in 7 years. Why not? And so, again, this is the kind of thing where, like, if he got hired, maybe it works out. But I just think there are so many question marks, and I get and my thing from the beginning has been, if he wasn't an Indiana alum, he wouldn't be on the list. And I think you need to get the best coach, not the best coach with Indiana ties. And I just think that it feels like bringing Mike Woodson back will be a warm blanket for some of the older fans who remember watching him play, and not really the best move to build a program at the college level. That's how I feel.
I think the biggest question I would have would be, who's the staff going to be with him? Because that would be any of these guys who have not been a head coach in college, maybe less so with guys like Dane Fife, or, because he's been a head coach in college and he's been at this level. I would be a little less concerned, but guys who are coming from the NBA, or guys, like Calvert Chaney would kind of fall in the same category as you want to know who's going to be helping them get players, because coaching college basketball and coaching professional basketball are two completely different things. It's not even in the same conversation. So at the beginning of this podcast, Ryan, I prefaced that there was going to be potentially more news as we were recording, and as we have started our recording, another Indiana player has entered the transfer portal. I'm not sure if you saw this on your feed, Ryan, but Race Thompson is in the transfer portal, according to a report by one of the national guys at 24/7. So there's another name. As I said, don't get alarmed by this, because, there's a site I follow, verbalcommits.com, has pretty much a running list of the transfer portal. And if you sit there and refresh the page, there's names popping in there every couple of minutes. So maybe the storyline at the end of all this is going to be who's not in the transfer portal, because it seems like a lot of guys are going in. Ryan, any thoughts on Race Thompson going in the transfer portal? Anything different than what we've talked about with Armon?
No, I think you got to explore your options. I think with Race, if you like Race and Armon, I think looking at it are the team's best two players next year. Maybe Christian Lander. That all depends on his development. I think Christian Lander has the potential to be the best player on the team, but it all depends on his development. But, those two guys are kind of heart and soul guys. And so you need both of those guys back if you want to be competitive next year. Now, if your goal is to build a program for 20 years and you're fine tanking 1 year to, because they don't fit the system or whatever, fine. But those are two guys who are incredibly important to next year's team. So, it's rough news. But again, they could easily come back. And I think that, quite frankly, it's the smart decision for both guys to do this and to explore their options until Indiana has a head coach. And this was already going to be a crazy year for transfers. You throw in a coaching change, and it just kind of emphasizes how important that is right now in college basketball.
Next time I wanted to get to John Bielen. There's been discussion of him. I don't know where things stand with this particular situation. I don't know if Indiana is legitimately interested. I don't know if he's interested in coming back to college. But the thing I look at with him is, that at this level, he can have high degrees of success. He is older at 68 years old. You wonder, does he still have the fire in his belly, quote unquote, to coach at this level and do all of the demands that would be necessary to be at Indiana? But we do know at Michigan, he took a program that was in really bad shape. And while it took him a little bit to turn it, once he got it rolling, they were winning Big Ten titles. They won a Big Ten tournament title, I believe. They went to the national championship game twice. So you can point to at least a track record with him to say, maybe he's only the coach for 5 to 7 years, but there's a chance there that he would leave the program in much better shape than what he found it in.
Yeah, I think he'd have to come in with some kind of coach in waiting situation, or at least maybe name that in his second year. But yeah, people talk about John Bielen like he's been gone from college basketball for a long time. I mean, in 2019, he led Michigan to a 30-7 record in the Sweet 16. He's only been out of basketball for really 1 year. I guess this is his second out of college basketball because he went to the Cavs and lasted about half the season. And it's not like he left Michigan under bad terms. He just went to try the NBA because it was his last chance, really. And he left that program in phenomenal shape. And Juwan Howard just, sort of picked up the ball and has run with it. I think that Bielen, if you can't get a top-tier current coaching candidate, I think Bielen's a good option because he'll set you up for success. He'll bring in top-level assistants. Again, he'd probably have to bring in somebody to be a coach in waiting situation with him because he's not going to coach more than, he's not going to be your 10 years. And so I think that would work. I mean, there are concerns from his time at Cleveland with the comments he made in the locker room, and he'd have to certainly come out and, make a huge statement of that. He's already done that, but I think that if you're getting hired again, that's all going to get rehashed, especially given the world we live in right now. Maybe rightfully so. And he would have to certainly make a big show of, this was a bad moment. It's not what I meant, whatever, and a mea culpa there. But I think that's something you can move past. The interesting thing will be, does he want to do it? And he certainly still has some loyalty to Michigan, and he still lives in Ann Arbor, I'm pretty sure, in that area. And I think that it'll be interesting to see if he wants to go to another program. I have heard that he is ready to coach. I've heard this for months, that he wants to coach and he wants to dive back in. He knows he doesn't have a ton of time left, and so he wants to get going. We'll see. But I think that, you cannot go wrong with that hire, understanding that it's going to be temporary. You're not going to get a guy, as I've said, for the next 2 decades. But he's certainly somebody who can turn things around at a program. He's shown he can do that repeatedly. And I don't think it would take too long, given how he had Michigan humming at the end. I think he's figured out the formula.
The age thing doesn't concern me as much as it seems to concern other people. Right now, there's 5 coaches in the ACC who are 70 or older, including a 76-year-old who has a team in the Sweet 16. So to say that should be the disqualifier, I don't agree with. I would be more concerned with how it ended in Cleveland and how that's going to be presented from a PR perspective, particularly when he's going to have to go recruit. He's definitely a guy that his players loved him. You saw this season, he was back at Michigan a lot for games, and the guys that were seniors. I think he was there for their senior day. So there's obviously
connection,
connection there, like to his players. I mean, and he put a ton of guys in the NBA. So I think there's, I think with him, the thing that you can count on is you're going to be relevant in the Big Ten because he's proven that he can do that. So I think that's what makes him an attractive option. I would not, you cannot go into it thinking we're gonna have to get a new coach in 5 to 7 years. If you're Indiana right now, you got to worry about the next couple of years because you've had all these years now where you haven't been good. If you have a chance to get a guy who can make you good in the next couple of years, you take that, and then you worry about what happens after that when that time comes. That's kind of how I see it. Another guy with Big Ten ties who has been talked about, obviously, Thad Matta at Ohio State. Seems like that's not happening based on just everything that's been reported. Any interest from you? And I'm not joking. I'm not meaning to make a joke about the reporting about the physical and all that. Any from your side of things? Was there any scenario in which Thad Matta would have made sense for Indiana?
Well, as far as I know, they reached out to him, at least informally. I don't really have anything after that. Certainly, the dots make sense. He lives in Indianapolis, coached in the Big Ten, coached at Butler, and Xavier's not exactly across the country, so he knows the region well. The crazy thing about that, and everybody has brought it up, but it's how young he is, considering how I always assumed he was in his 60s, and he's only 53. And I apologize, Thad, if you hear this, for assuming that you were older than that. But he's a guy who has ties to the state, deep ties to the state, so it makes sense. And he was wildly successful at Ohio State. I think people forget just how good his teams were and how good his run was there. And basically health issues derailed it at the end. His foot issues and his back issue really made it so he couldn't recruit, made coaching very difficult. If Thad Matta is healthy and ready, and what I've heard is he will tell everyone that his back is fine now. He's never going to be, his foot issue is now he has drop foot. He's never going to be better. So that would be an impediment, obviously. But I've heard that, he's going to pick and choose his next job because he's not Bielen. He's not 68. He's got a little bit of time to figure it out, but he would like to coach again. And obviously the dots make sense. And if you're Indiana and you are sure that he's healthy, that's a guy that certainly has to be near the top of your list because of just, obviously he's had the time to get healthy since he left Ohio State, and it's been a couple of years, and he's put himself out there for a couple jobs, and then maybe kind of just, I don't know if he turned them down or if they turned him down or what, but I think that if that guy is ready to get back into coaching, I don't think you can really go wrong there. He's going to set up a good program and he's going to run it. Now, the issue, again, that's assuming he's healthy enough to do it and healthy enough to travel and healthy enough to recruit and do all of those things. That's the risk. But Thad Matta is a hell of a coach, and he's the best unemployed coach right now. Bielen's great, but Bielen, obviously the age is an issue. But he's a hell of a coach, and I think he'd be a great get if the health issues are able to be dealt with.
My thoughts on him are similar to what I said on Bielen, in that at least there's a baseline expectation of what you can get out of him. He's recruited Indiana very well. He's obviously had multiple Big Ten championships, Big Ten tournament championships, gone to the Final Four, gone to a national championship game. I got another guy that's really well liked by his former players, well respected. Yes. And so from that standpoint, I think it would make some sense.
He's had success everywhere, too. Every stop. Right. He went to Butler was great. Xavier was great. Ohio State, great. He
also was the one that I think allowed Brad Stevens to volunteer in the Butler basketball office, and we saw where that career went for young Brad Stevens. So there's another feather in the cap of Thad Matta. I want to go to some guys who are still coaching right now in the tournament that have been mentioned. Again, preferencing all of this conversation. This is not Ryan and I's list of coaches that we think are being considered for the job. I'm going to actually, before we get out of here, I'm going to ask Ryan a question. And we'll see. I think it'd be an interesting question for him to think about and consider. But let's talk about these three guys I'm thinking of right now, and you don't have to talk about all three of them. I'm just kind of curious if you like any of them, or if you think any of them make sense. Loyola Chicago, Porter Moser, one name that's been discussed, obviously. Another one, Dane Altman at Oregon, and Eric Musselman at Arkansas. Any of those three guys make sense for Indiana in your mind?
I like Porter Moser. I like what he's done. I like how he's built that program. I think he's built it into something where if he stays at Loyola Chicago, this isn't going to be a 2-run thing in the NCAA tournament. I think that they're going to be pretty good for a long time. I think that of the three you mentioned, he's the most likely to get consideration. I think Dana Altman has had some issues off the court at Oregon that will disqualify him. Eric Musselman is interesting because he's a wildly successful college coach, has been successful at Nevada and now at Arkansas. He runs an up-tempo, fun system to watch, but there are personality issues with him that remind a lot of people of sort of what they dealt with Tom Crean. And I think there are people still in that athletic department who at Indiana would be like, no, we don't want to go back to that. You know, he's very temperamental. He's high strung. He's happy one moment, angry the next, kind of, you know, it's great when you're winning. That is awesome when you're winning because that guy's going to be positive every day and he's going to be incredibly enthusiastic. But then there's the flip side of rough days. And I liken him a little bit to what I heard about at Nevada about him, about Jim Harbaugh. So when Jim Harbaugh left Stanford to go to the NFL, they were upset because they lost the winning. You know, they were like, oh, well, we're losing a winning coach. But a lot of people who worked closely with him were thrilled he was gone. And then in the 49ers, they went to a Super Bowl. Everyone loved the fact that they won. And then when he left, everyone at the 49ers was relieved when he was gone. And I think that there's some similar things with some of these guys who are highly competitive, highly energetic. It can wear on people. And being energetic and being competitive are great. But the flip side, when things don't go well, can sometimes be rough. So to answer your question, of the three, I really like what Porter Moser's done at Loyola Chicago. I think he's built a consistent winner. I think that he has recruited really well given the size of the school. And I think that he's going to get hired somewhere this year. I would not be, unless Loyola Chicago just is able to pony up cash and he's comfortable there, I think he's going to wind up somewhere.
What would you say to those who would counter his candidacy by saying he's been a head coach for 17 years. He's made the NCAA tournament twice. I've had some people on the forum that on our forum have kind of brought that point up. I brought it up on Twitter when Andy Katz said that he was the clear-cut best favorite in terms of active coaches. I'm not disagreeing that he could potentially be a good candidate, just disagreeing more that he's the clear-cut top candidate of active coaches, because I do think you have to kind of balance out the two things. All right, he's had these two really good runs, but he's also been a head coach for a long time. Do you think there's anything to the fact that maybe these last 4 seasons at Loyola, I know he had the Final Four run, then he had 2 seasons where I think they won 20 games, but he was just outside the top 100 in Ken Palm. But then this year, again, they're back in the mix in the tournament. But do you think there's anything to maybe he has figured something out here the last couple of years that he's maybe turned a corner as a coach?
Certainly there could be something to that. I think the other thing is that he's recruiting to Loyola Chicago, and you're going to miss on guys, and because you're taking a much lower level guy, and there's much more variance of what you can expect from them. And he has been able to get some pretty good players in there and work them into his system. I do agree. The fact that there's a long track record and only a short, stretch of success. They won the CBI in 2015, I think. Other than that, he's been over, 20 wins the last 4 years, had 18 the year before that, 32-6 the year they made the Final Four run, 26-4 this year. I agree there's risk bringing a mid-major guy. We just saw that with Archie. There's risk. And somebody, I forget who it was, but somebody had a quote that's like, if a guy wasn't on your coaching board before March, he shouldn't be after because he makes a run. Like, you should have your board of who you think's a great coach. And then if a guy makes a run, you shouldn't just add him because of that. And so I think Moser, the reason why he comes up and the reason why I think of the 3 you mentioned, he's the best candidate for the job is because if you talk to people in the coaching profession, they tell you that the guy's a star. Like, the guy is really good. And whether he's figured something out or whether it's always been there and he's just never been able to get the players, or whether, the situation at the school wasn't great, whatever it is, people who know him and talk about him rave about him and say that they think he is a potential star.
The other thing there is the personality, I think, fits a little bit better with Indiana than what Archie Miller did. You can't say for sure that another mid-major guy can't work, because there's a lot of different things that are going to go into being successful in Indiana, and I think the personality has to fit. And I think in this instance, it could be a fit personality-wise. Two more guys that I want to talk about. Actually, I'll throw in a third name. I haven't posted the profile, but I've written it. I'm trying to not post them all in one day, but three more Indiana guys that I want to throw at you and see if you think there's any of these make any sense. One would be Michael Lewis, who's an assistant coach right now at UCLA. He spent a long time as an assistant coach, he started out his coaching career at Texas Tech as a grad assistant under Bob Knight. He moved up through the ranks, Eastern Illinois, Butler, Nebraska. Now he's at UCLA. They're in the Sweet 16. Dane Fife, pretty similar in terms of working their way up. He has been a head coach one time. Now he's worked in the Big Ten a long time under Tom Izzo, had great success at Michigan State. I think both of those guys, I know them both a little bit. They're grinders, they're hard workers, and they love Indiana. So those are obviously all things that are positive. Another name that's been mentioned, Calvert Chaney, who has coached in college as well. He's worked at Indiana under Tom Crean, I think in a player development role, been an assistant coach at St. Louis. I think now he's an assistant coach now with the Pacers. It's more of a kind of a player development role rather than being an actual bench coach, but he still is listed as an assistant coach. He's another person that when you talk to people about Calvert Chaney, you cannot find people that are going to say something bad about him. That's just how good of a guy he is and how well, respected by former teammates, the all-time leading scorer in the Big Ten. That one kind of has like a Juwan Howard type of feel to it. Potentially, obviously, it's not an apples-to-apples comparison because Juwan Howard was an NBA All-Star, made over $100 million, was a Fab Five guy, had the relationship with LeBron and all those guys. It's a little bit different. But
yeah,
if you're going the former player route that was a stud at your school, Calvert Chaney is a guy you look at. Any of those three names, are those guys you would consider at all, or they kind of further down? Like, do you think, I guess my question is, do you think the floor should stop at somebody like Bielen, or do you think there's an argument to be made to kind of vet some of these other guys and potentially give one of them a shot?
I'm fine with vetting everybody. You know what I mean? Like, I talk to whoever you want. I think you need to do that and do your due diligence. I don't think you just wipe people off the board because, well, he's not, he doesn't have X, Y, or Z. I'm fine with talking to everybody, and I think that is what that's what a search committee is for, essentially. And a smart AD will look at all his options. Do I think that some of those people are worthy of the job? Probably not. I don't think that they have the resume that leads up to a job. I mean, Michael Lewis has never been a head coach at any level, and it's not to say he's not a great assistant and couldn't be a great head coach, but it's a huge unknown. Calvert Chaney, I've heard a lot of people making the one-to-one comparison with Juwan Howard, and as you said, that is not a one-to-one comparison. First of all, Juwan Howard inherited a program that is humming. And also, when he was a player, people used to talk about Juwan Howard being a savant and being brilliant. He was the smartest guy in the Fab Five. He was also a part of the Fab Five, something that is a touchstone moment in college basketball that even young kids today have heard about. Those kids changed basketball. And he played, he's a guy who can open his phone and get LeBron on the phone. You want to know why he recruits well? Hey, yeah, I'm buddies with LeBron. He also coached under Eric Spoelstra in the NBA, one of the most underrated coaches in history. I mean, he doesn't get the credit he deserves. He's starting to get noticed more now, but he was a top assistant for one of the best coaches in the NBA for a long time. He got schooled, and was able to bring that to college. So I think that people look at Juwan Howard, that is a special instance of a guy who'd never been a head coach, but who had been ready to be a head coach for a long time coming back. So it's hard to compare one-to-one. That's a very special, unique situation. What I will say is a guy like Dane Fife is probably the lowest on the list I would go. But I would also insist that he brought in an experienced former head coach as a top assistant, sort of like what Juwan Howard has done with Phil Martelli, because Dane hasn't run a program by himself in a while. I think he is a guy who could be a great head coach. He just hasn't done it in a long time. But here's the thing about him that I like other than the other guys is he's been in the Big Ten for how long? He knows how to win in the Big Ten. Watching Tom Izzo do it for a decade now. And I would say, if you brought in, somebody had said, well, what if you bring in Mike Woodson and your top assistant Dane Fife? It's like, I'd be more excited the other way around. Bring in Dane Fife and bring in Mike Woodson as his offensive guru and a guy who's been a head coach before. Woodson's an assistant in the NBA. I don't know if he'd come to be an assistant in college, but something like that. Bring in the older veteran to help him as he, starts the program. Like that appeals to me far more than bringing in an older guy and having Fife be, trying to bring Fife away from Michigan State, which I don't know if he's going to leave for a non-head coaching job. He's kind of got it made there. So of those guys, Fife interests me the most. But I think there's got to be a lot of caveats there in who he brings in and who helps him out.
Last thing I wanted to talk about, Ryan, and this is kind of putting you on a spot because this is something I've thought about too. What are the chances that the hire is somebody that nobody's thinking about, that nobody's talking about? Because I think there is a possibility of that from the standpoint of what do we really know about what Scott Dolson is doing behind the scenes, other than the fact that we feel somewhat confident that he talked to Brad Stevens in some form, because that's obvious that you have to do that. Like, you can't have the head coaching position at Indiana University open and not ask Brad Stevens if he wants the job, like at least for a couple days, or make him think about it. So whether or not there was an offer presented, I mean, I feel confident in saying that the tires were kicked, at least on that situation. And there's a feeling that wasn't going anywhere. So now you move down the list. But beyond that, what do we really know other than these lists that are out there? Scott Dolson's not saying anything. There, like I've said, reiterated earlier, there's not a lot of people who are actually talking. I don't think that actually know what's going on. You hear different things, you get text messages. So is there a chance in your mind, and how good of a chance is there that this hire is somebody that we have not even talked about right now on this podcast? Is that in play?
I think so, certainly. Because Scott Dolson has a very small circle on this. Here's the things I know is that the people he went after initially, at least for interviews and to not offer the job, but to explore possibilities with, were Brad Stevens and Mike Woodson. Were the two people he went at first. And that doesn't mean that he was, one of them was going to say yes and take the job. It was just, those are the first two names he explored. The Brad Stevens thing, I don't know if there was an official offer or anything, but they went at him hard, as they should have. I mean, I don't think they did everything you could do as an athletic department, everything as a fan you can ask of your athletic department. They went at him hard. He considered it. It felt like, to me, just the vibes I was getting was they talked to him, he was considering it, and it felt like he slept on it, woke up and said, all right, I'm staying. I mean, that's sort of the vibe I got talking to a number of people. But those are the two guys that he was initially exploring. After that, I don't know. I mean, I've heard rumors and things like that, but nothing I would write. And so there is a good chance there is somebody completely outside who we're thinking of. I would say maybe about 50%, that there's a chance that there's somebody we're not even considering who is going to get the job. And it could be somebody great. It could be somebody that Scott Dolson has a relationship with that he thinks is great, that maybe other people don't, but he's got a vibe on this guy. I don't know. And I will say I was talking to somebody the other day and I was like, wow, it's really quiet. And he's like, yeah, there's like 3 people who know things and nobody's talking right now. And maybe that means they're close to an offer and they're all clamming up, or, they're just working on stuff. And so they're not talking. I don't know, but this has certainly been shut down. And the thing is, when you have a search committee, that's when leaks happen. And Dolson was very adamant. It was very adamant that he did not want a search committee. He wanted to do this on his own. I think part of that has to be the fact that I know he was back channeling for a few weeks with certain people before firing Archie, because you do that as an AD, and people say like, oh, well, somebody already had the job. Like, why was he back channeling? ADs are back channeling all the time if they're smart, because you never know what could happen. Tomorrow there could be your coach could resign for no reason, and just decide he wants to spend time with his family. You've always got to have feelers out there knowing where your job sort of stands with certain people. So he had a pretty decent idea, I think, of who in the grand scheme of things was willing to look at the job. And that's why he didn't need a search committee. And there's no leaks coming out. You said it, you hit the nail on the head early in this episode, where you said that the people who know things aren't talking, and the people who don't know things are talking too much. And I think that the fan base is getting frustrated because there's all these rumors out there. Figure out who you can trust as your sources, pretty much. And it's the people who temper everything with, this may not be true. Because like you can't, there are very few things you can say definitively at this point about the job opening.
Exactly. It's one of those things where, we live in this society now where Twitter and social media and the 24-hour news cycle, people are used to getting a constant stream of information, and 9 days in a coaching search does feel like an eternity. However, it's important to remember it has only been 9 days. This hire is about the next, hopefully for Scott Dolson, his line of thinking is for the next, 15, 20 years of Indiana basketball. Not the next month, not who's in the transfer portal right now, not who is going to make the fan base happy for the next 2 weeks. It's about getting the job right. Because, listen, if he doesn't get this right, you can say everything you want about all the other sports at Indiana. There's a ton of great things going on right now at IU. Football is in the best shape it's been in maybe ever. Women's basketball, they're in the Sweet 16. They're knocking on the door of the Sweet 16. Knock on wood. I want to jinx them because they're playing later today. Hopefully they make it there. Baseball is in great. There's just so many great things going on.
Soccer is.
You got to get basketball right, though, at Indiana, right? And this is a job that's going to define Scott Dolson's tenure, like it or not. Because if we're having this conversation again in 4 to 5 years, it's not just going to be the coach on the hot seat. It's going to be Scott Dolson on the hot seat, because there's just no tolerance from the fan base. And it's completely fair because they have seen what Indiana can be when it's at its height, but there's no tolerance for mediocrity. So he's got to get this right. So I would urge everybody to stay as patient as possible.
Well, and think about this. As an AD at Indiana, if you look throughout history, you get one chance at a basketball hire. One chance. Rick Greenspan made 2, but that was because the Kelvin Sampson issue. And he hired Tom Crean and was out shortly after that. Fred Glass made the Archie hire. That's it. Scott Dolson, this may be his only chance to hire a basketball coach. We don't know. And so you get one chance, you better get it right. And so he should take his time. And by the way, if the hire is announced the week of the Final Four, that didn't take that long, and it's plenty of time to reel players back in. And by the way, when Nate Oates took over Alabama, was it Kyra Lewis who was in the transfer portal, and he brought him back? The right coach will bring guys back from the transfer portal. So if people are worried about that, stop. And if kids want to go play for another coach, that's fine. Indiana will get recruits. Indiana will get its own transfers, whatever. I just think that, it's going to take however long it takes to get the right guy. And hopefully Dolson does get the right guy.
All you need to know about the power of transfers right now in college basketball is Arkansas's team is mostly all grad transfers and freshmen. So as you said, if you get the right person, it can turn quickly. And I think now the transfer portal being what it is, that's a tool that is going to be able to be tapped into if you get the right person in. And maybe you do, even if you do lose a couple guys, what's to say that you can't replace them with 2 or 3 other guys that are going to be, maybe better fits for the new system, or maybe even better players that could be out there. I think sometimes you get so caught up in, well, we have to keep this guy because he was at Indiana before. Well, you know what? You should want for the player what's best for them. If they want to move on, that's fine. That's their right. But you also should keep an open mind and let whoever does get the job have a chance to build their own roster and put their own stamp on the program. It's just the same thing with all these discussions of, well, they should keep this coach on staff. That rarely happens because you don't want to hire a coach and say, well, we really want you to be the coach, but we want you to keep this person as director of ops. We want you to keep this assistant coach. We want you to keep this. I mean, that doesn't work. You're basically
you to run your
guy
program. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's basically what Dolson was saying when he talked about everything in the press conference. He wants to get a CEO. He wants to get a guy in that can put his own stamp on things while being, a collaborative effort with the athletic department. So we'll see kind of all how this shakes out, Ryan. I just wanted to have you on because it's always, you're always opinionated, but I feel like that you've got substance behind all of your takes. And so I really enjoy that about you. I really enjoyed the conversation, and we're going to have you back once Indiana does make the hire to get your opinion on that, because we've had this explosion of podcasts now the last 9 days, but think about what it's going to be like after the hire is actually made, because there's going to be a coach that we can break down. If it's an assistant coach that it's coming up for the first time, we're going to have to go back and look kind of what he did at this school or why he's the guy. If it's a head coach, we're going to be looking at YouTube video, trying to figure out what the defense and offensive strategies are. There's going to be so much to discuss. So Ryan, as always, thanks for coming on the show. Hopefully next time it won't be a catastrophic event that brings you back on.
Yeah, we'll just hang out and talk about, nice things. Alex, always a pleasure. Always a great time talking with you in person, on the podcast, whatever. Enjoy it, buddy.
All right, everybody. We'll be back maybe later this week if Indiana hires a coach with another episode of Podcast on a Break. Maybe next week. Who knows at this point? Our schedule is to be determined, but if you like the show, subscribe via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, leave us a review. We really appreciate that. And we'll be back sometime soon, hopefully, with another episode of Podcast on the Break.